Okay, here's a thought. Shouldn't the video game industry care about the preservation of, I don't know, video games? Unfortunately, with the focus on making money, there's no way they can monetize your purchases of old physical copies of retro games. Think about it. Who did most of your money go to when buying the games from your physical collection? A lot of it was likely to random people at garage sales and flea markets, or perhaps fellow gamers at a convention, or maybe even some random person across the country who you bought it from on eBay. Now, if you bought a physical copy of a game when it was brand new, then sure, the company who made it or published it is getting your money, but in those cases, they're not trying to sell it to you so you have a chance to preserve it, they're selling it to you just because it's the newest, latest thing they're trying to make money off of. And sure, there are compilations of older games that get released, but there's issues with that as well. If preservation was an actual concern, certain releases wouldn't be digital only. For example, there's a bundle on PS4 that includes both Castlevania Symphony of the Night and Rondo of Blood. These are two highly cherished retro games that collectors would love to have a physical copy of. But guess what? You can't because it's digital only. Now, luckily for these specific games, you can get physical copies of them, but my point is that it would have been so great to have a physical copy of the PS4 release, because maybe you don't have some of that older hardware, or perhaps you just simply want it for a newer console. Not to mention, some games released digitally are not available in any sort of physical format whatsoever, or the physical format that they are available in is an option that's prohibitively expensive. That really sucks for collectors. And then what about something like the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle? Some of the games on here are great games that were never released before, and yet, here we are again looking at digital only, in the US. Yes, it is possible to import a Japanese physical copy and play it in English, but still, they're making us bend over backwards to collect these games. Okay, but what about the counter-argument to this, which is that it's more expensive to produce physical copies of a game and sell it that way as opposed to just selling it digitally? Well, there's a very simple solution to that, which is to just charge a little bit more. Gamers who want it badly enough will gladly pay a little bit extra, and the ones who don't want to still have the option not to. I mean, we've got companies like Limited Run Games doing this for indie games that sell perfectly fine, and if anything, the demand almost always outdoes the supply on these. It's understandable that smaller indie game developers would utilize these companies to deal with the physical production of games, but with bigger companies like Capcom and Konami, it's like, come on, you've got plenty of resources to do it yourselves. Alright, now I know what you might be thinking at this point. But Retrobird, what about these old cartridge games being released? Well, that's not really a mainstream movement, and here's the thing about it. This is usually done for very popular games that sold perfectly well back in the day, so just buying the original cartridges is usually not only very possible, but also way cheaper. Let's take Street Fighter II for example. This game sold millions of copies back in the day, not to mention all the updated versions, re-releases, and compilations it's been put on over the years. If there's any game that's in danger of being lost to history, it's certainly not Street Fighter II. So it's not like it's giving collectors a chance to collect something that's hard to get. Rather, it's a unique collector's piece that targets something they know is really popular. Still, I don't have any problem with the fact that these exist, it's just one more option for collectors. Alright, next up we've got to talk about mini consoles. I know a lot of collectors may not consider these to be something to collect, but yet a lot of us do, so I'm going to consider them as such. I've said before in my dedicated video about mini consoles that I think they're important to the preservation of gaming's history. That's all well and good, but again, we've got a problem. Let me explain. Does anybody remember what the launch of the NES Mini was like? Well, if you don't, I can tell you that there was an enormous supply and demand issue. And I'm talking way more demand than supply. To me, this shows a huge disconnect between the mainstream gaming industry and the retro gaming community of collectors. We are retro game collectors. If you release something retro gaming related that is actually good, then a large chunk of us will probably want to collect it. And even if a lot of the people who purchased the mini consoles aren't collectors, maybe they were people who hadn't played video games for years, my point still remains, which is that the appeal of retro gaming was just flat out underestimated. If they had known these mini consoles were going to be so popular, they probably would have been made sooner. If not by Nintendo, then certainly by somebody else. And I'm talking about quality mini consoles with proper HDMI output, not the half-baked garbage that companies like AtGames were putting out. It wasn't until other companies saw the success that Nintendo had until they jumped on board. Sega finally realized that they needed to make the console a quality product and not have AtGames making it. Sony, on the other hand, didn't prioritize quality, and it backfired on them big time with the PS1 Classic quickly making its way to bargain bins. It's like, hello, this only works if the product isn't a piece of crap. I may be getting a little off track though. My point of all of this is that the video game industry was extremely reactionary rather than being proactive about trying to promote retro gaming. Promote gaming's history. Tell us that these games are awesome with marketing, influence, and all the other power you have, rather than us having to tell you that it's awesome. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm still glad that the mini console craze happened, as it does help make retro gaming more mainstream and widespread, but the industry needs to do more to celebrate gaming's history and help keep these games alive. I understand that it ultimately comes down to money, but there's clearly plenty of demand for it, and they've got lots of smart people who can figure out how to monetize that. Alright, so to summarize, we need the gaming industry to do a better job making games from history's past more easily available, and specifically available to collectors, as well as do more to perpetuate gaming's history. Collectors are important. They're some of gaming's biggest fans. I mean, my goodness, remember Console Collector? Who's a bigger fan of games than that guy? Collectors are probably one of the biggest representatives of retro gaming. By keeping retro gaming strong and thriving, I'd argue it keeps gaming as a whole strong and thriving. Because that way gaming is considered something with a history that matters, and not just something that is only as good as its most recent games. Alright, so there we have it. I don't know if you could tell, but I have a lot of passion about this kind of stuff. For this video's question, I've got a fun one though. What is the one game that you wish you could own a physical copy of, but cannot? This could be because it's too expensive, because it's on a console you don't have, or of course because it simply doesn't exist. For me, it would probably be the Capcom arcade game Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Alright, really looking forward to your answers, so leave a comment down below, and I will see ya in the next video.